back to my channel. In today's video, it is actually part 2 of a series, I guess you could say. In the previous video that was uploaded, I did a stationery set featuring this particular stamp set. And today I'm making a card to go with it. So this is the Pinkfresh Studio Floral Trio Stamp Die and Stencil Bundle. And I'm going to go ahead and stamp this out in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I do end up having to stamp this a couple times. This is just some plain white cardstock. I am stamping it twice just because I missed a little spot. I'm going to be doing some partial die cutting, and I'll show you that when we get to it. This is the Pinkfresh Studio Ornate Banner die set. This is the smallest kind of the decorative banners. And we're going to be doing some partial die cutting, but we will get to that in a second. This is the Simon Says stamp All About Mom stamp and die. We'll be using that for our sentiment today. I've used this in all of my Mother's Day cards this series. This is just a cream slimline card base, and this is the reason why I chose this particular banner die. I made that card base out of some Paper Studio cream cardstock, and it measures 3.5 by 8.5 when folded. And then I'm going to be using about 8 inks from Pinkfresh Studio. These are the same inks that I used in the stationery set. I just decided to kind of keep going with that because I liked how it turned out. So we have Coral Reef, Peach Fuzz, Apricot, Sparkling Rose, Bubblegum, Passionfruit, Clementine, which I do not end up using, and Fresh Pear and Grassy Knoll. So first things first, just so this ink can have a little bit to dry, because the Pinkfresh Studio inks I'm using are paler. They're a little bit softer, and so particularly the first layer. And so I really want to make sure that this ink is dry before I go into stenciling so that I don't smear this ink absolutely everywhere. So I do stamp this twice, not twice, because that's totally not a word. I do stamp it twice just to make sure I've got a nice bold impression, and then I'm going to set that off to the side to dry. So this is the partial die cutting. So I have this banner here, and I've taped it in place. Now everything that is under this clear die cutting plate is going to cut. So everything under this is going to cut. Everything above it is not, because the die cut machine is going to only apply pressure to where that top plate is. So as you can see, it didn't cut all the way through. It just cut where I had that top plate. So now I'm going to flip it, and it should kind of lock in like a puzzle piece. Now, when I go to place the die cutting plate over the top of this, I have to be careful because there are now 2 spots that I don't want to cut, and there's just kind of this middle area that I do want to cut. So when I go to place this time, I need to make sure that I don't actually cut where it's the horizontal bar underneath that die cutting plate. Otherwise, I'd end up cutting my thing in like half, and so it'd be kind of weird. Now, I didn't actually get this lined up perfectly. There was a little bit of space where it didn't actually die cut, but it was so small. You'll see what I do to kind of correct that. So again, this page measures 8.5 tall, and I don't need it quite that tall, but I do want this to be a bit taller than I have it right now. So I end up having to die cut this partially, like 4 times, I think, total. If I could have used a die that was bigger, you wouldn't have that problem. But see there, I'm trying to point out to you that it didn't actually die cut all the way through. So I'm just taking some really sharp pointed scissors, and I'm just going to snip that, and then no one will ever know that it didn't actually die cut all the way through. And this ends up not really being a big deal, even if it was noticeable that it didn't die cut all the way through, just because when I put my flower on top of it, you really can't see any difference. It gets hidden. So I'm going to place this one more time, and I could have made it to where the top border was actually decorative, but I chose not to. but that is an option to make both ends kind of that decorative border. I chose to kind of have the flat edge on my card. So again, I'm going to place this in and die cut this out. I think this is the third time, and then I do end up die cutting it a fourth time and just kind of showing you the end result off screen. So here it is, all die cut out, and we got from this small kind of squatty ornate banner to this long kind of slimline banner. So this is just another way for you to kind of stretch your supplies so that you don't have to have a banner, or excuse me, a die for absolutely everything. So here I wanted to do some partial ink blending just to kind of help separate kind of the banner from the floral, the cardstock from the background, from the card base, and to also give just a little bit more interest, make the card just a little bit more special. So this is the Fresh Pear ink, and I'm just going to ink blend this very lightly, focusing more on that top right corner, but I do end up kind of ink blending more, getting more of a saturation along the borders, the top border and the right hand border, just because I wanted to have a little bit more concentration of ink in those two spots. Here I'm bringing in this stamp set just to kind of see if I like how it's been ink blended so far, and I am okay with that. So I'm going to move on to the stenciling. So for this first layer, if you watched the previous video, and I encourage you to do so because that'll kind of explain a little more in depth about these stencils, but this first stencil for the flowers, all three of those flowers are on the same stencil. So when I was picking my colors, I made sure that I picked colors that would ink blend well together, so are next to each other on the color wheel. You don't want to choose something like a purple and a yellow, because when you blend those together, they're going to make kind of like a desaturated, ugly, brownish gray color, and that wouldn't necessarily be pretty. You can do some masking. I've seen several crafters use this and do some masking, but particularly with the stationery set, I was mass producing. I was doing 30 of these, and I didn't want to have to take the time to actually mask all this out. So I chose color. I was very careful in the colors I chose, particularly as they were going to be blending together. For this card, I could have done some masking. It wouldn't have been that big a deal because it's just one card, maybe two. But again, I chose to kind of keep it consistent between the stationery set and these florals. And so I chose to kind of do what I did on the stationery set. So this is the Peach Fuzz, the Coral Reef, and the Sparkling Rose, I think. Maybe it's the Bubblegum, not sure. So that's the first layer. So we're going to move on to the second layer of the flowers, and this just adds a little bit more detail. And I mentioned in the previous video that I felt like when I added this second layer on of these colors, I could have just left it and had the leaves be black and white. I thought that was really pretty and very like modern and bold. But I ended up going ahead and, like I said, keeping it consistent between the stationery set and the cards, and doing both layers or both designs the same way. So since this is all the same as the previous video, I'm going to speed through this. This is the Apricot, Bubblegum, or Passion Fruit, and the Sparkling Rose, I believe. For the leaves, I did the Fresh Pear in the first layer and the Grassy Knoll in the second layer. And like I mentioned in the previous video, again, I felt like this really came together when I added this second layer on the green. The leaves, I felt like that really just brought it together. So I kind of feel like you either need to do just the florals or you need to do all 4 layers. I did end up going back and adding some more green. I just didn't feel like I had enough definition and contrast. So I did use the coordinating die and die cut it out, and this is what it looks like when it's all die cut. I wanted to show you that there are actually like openings within those leaves and those flowers. A lot of dies just do a very like an outline, but this actually cuts some innards. I wanted to show you that the two larger sentiments on here actually have coordinating dies as well, but I did not use those on today's card. My intention was to have this be a vertical card, but as I was going through, the sentiments that I wanted to use were just too big. They just didn't fit the proportions of how I had everything laid out. And so I turned it on its side. I made it a landscape card, and I'm going to use this You Are Wonderful. This is for my sister-in-law. She doesn't watch any of my videos, I don't believe, so I can say who it's for. And so the Happy Mother's Day just didn't fit right proportionally, and the other ones were like as if I was speaking to my mom or a mother figure for me, which didn't make any sense for the situation. So the You Are Wonderful is what I went with, and I'm going to end up partially cutting off or adhering part of this and then using the cut off portions to fill in some gaps on this card. So now I've got everything adhered, including the portions that I had cut off of the original image, just to kind of, like I said, fill in some gaps. So now we're going to move on to the sentiment, and I'm convinced that I want to use this You Are Wonderful, not only because do I feel like it fits, but because it actually fits the occasion, because she is my sister-in-law, not my mom. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm still kind of deciding on if I want to heat emboss this or stamp it in an ink that I used. And so while I'm trying to kind of determine that, I'm going to go ahead and pop up this banner with some Instant Dimension foam tape from Altenew. I have a huge roll of this, and I just take little bits of it and cut it off of a smaller little ream that I make. I've went ahead and removed the release paper, and I've adhered that flat directly to the card using that foam tape. You could have cut the banner out several times, but like we did, since we did partial die cutting, that would have taken a long time. So I opted not to do it that way. I decided I was going to go ahead and use the You Are Wonderful, and I'm going to use the, I think it's the Coral Reef ink, and I'm going to stamp it out a few times. It took a little bit. It was kind of splotchy and I missed a couple spots, so I do end up stamping that 3 or 4 times just to get good saturation and coverage and a clean, crisp image. I went ahead and used its coordinating die to cut that sentiment out, and here I'm showing you how I make my little smaller reams. So that one to the right is the original, and it is huge, and so I wanted to have something out more accessible on my desk, and so I ended up kind of creating my own smaller ream of that Instant Dimension foam tape so that I can put that larger roll just in a drawer and kind of pull from it and make a smaller ream anytime I run out. I went ahead and added some of that Instant Dimension foam tape to the back of the sentiment. I felt like it just needed a little something something. And now for these florals. I felt like my sister-in-law would appreciate some sparkly flowers, so here is a Spectrum Noir crystal clear glitter pen. If you've watched one of my previous videos, you saw that I used a Wink of Stella and I exploded absolutely everywhere on my card. So I was smart this time and kind of squeezed and tested it out on a scrap piece of paper before I brought it to my project. You know, live and learn. So I'm just adding some glitter to these flowers, and that is that part. I did go through my stash and found some kind of white iridescent gems, and I'm adhering those kind of in the open spaces to the left where it's white, and then a few around the sentiment to the right. And that will finish this card. So I appreciate you spending time with me. I do hope that you would take the time to watch the stationery set. It's very simple. Stationery for someone does not have to be complicated. It doesn't have to have tons of bells and whistles. You can make it beautiful and very simple. So I hope that you would take the time to watch that video. It was posted about the same time as this one, so it shouldn't be too hard to find. So I did end up pairing this with a white Paper Studio slimline envelope, and that is the finished project for the day. Again, thank you so much for spending time with me. I hope to see you back, and we will see you next time. Bye.